We're joined by renowned author and Middle East expert Tariq Ali. Thank you for being with us this Saturday. President Mubarak was not going to step down just 2 days ago. What could have influenced his final decision? Do you think he was pressured from abroad?
Well, I think that there were two things that happened. The attempt made by Suleiman, Mubarak's deputy, to try and crush the demonstrators through violence failed. Then the choices were very clear. Either they call in the army to carry out a bloodbath in Tahrir Square in front of the world, and that was too risky an option for the Egyptian army because it might have split the army. The generals might have carried out the orders if the Pentagon had approved them. But young officers whose children, whose families, whose brothers and sisters are involved in this uprising might have desisted. So it was a very serious risk for Washington. And in the end, they decided it would be safer to dump Mubarak. And Mubarak then refused to carry out orders from the Pentagon, but only for 24 hours. He resisted for one day, and the next day he was gone because the army told him he had to go, and the army, Field Marshal Tantawi, the defense minister, as we've already heard, is a close ally of the Pentagon and takes orders directly.
With that said, I just want you to reiterate, if you can, how much pressure, in fact, do you think came from abroad?
Well, I think the United States had wobbled. They were tempted to keep Mubarak in power, as they had done for 30 years, but the Egyptian people's anger and mobilization was so huge that they had no option but to dump him. This is a very different sort of mass movement from the ones we saw in Ukraine and other parts of Eastern Europe. This was a movement which actually wanted to break from the ugly embrace of the United States, which has wrecked their country. So a lot of extremely interesting things are likely to happen now. And if the military attempts to put another stooge in power to carry out orders from foreign lands, it might not work because the Egyptian people feel they're the ones who removed Mubarak, nobody else.
So you don't think that there's a danger that the military won't try to put who they want into power, that a democratic leader will in fact be able to be fairly elected by Egyptians?
Well, this is what Egyptians hope, and this is what I hope. If the army hasn't learnt any lessons at all in trying to find Suleiman, who's a disgusting, crude torturer, a guy who actually tortures people himself, but he would be too risky for them, or if they try and find someone else who they completely trust, and there's an opposition candidate supported by the mass movement and the opposition, I think the opposition candidate will win. And if they try and rig the election, as they used to do when Mubarak used to stand and rig the vote, you might have a new mass movement and you might have serious divisions inside the army. So it would be foolish of them to go down that route just after the mass movement has removed one dictator.
Do you think that a mass movement is growing between the Egyptian people and Washington?
I think the mass movement in Egypt is a movement for national independence, end to neocolonialism, and for democracy. If you heard the slogans that were being chanted, it was Egypt, 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 meaning we are fed up of being bullied by foreign powers and forced into peace treaties which don't do us any good, and our generals bought directly with billions of dollars by the Pentagon. I think people are fed up of that, and they want something different, and they have fought for it, and they have lost lives. 300 Egyptians died in this struggle. Thousands were injured. They have sacrificed these things, and they will not want to give them up too easily.
How deep, then, do you think Washington will be involved in the upcoming elections?
I think that Washington will be involved, and the big obsession Washington has is nothing should happen to destabilize their permanent ally, Israel. That is all they're concerned about. And they're also concerned about the effects of this upheaval now on Jordan, on Yemen, and who knows, even on Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. So regardless of what Washington wants, it can't totally control the situation. Because when Arab people in the Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Jordan, in Algeria, see what their fellow Arabs have achieved in Tunisia and Egypt, the temptation is going to be, if them, why not us? So it is not going to be easy for Washington to control all these countries. I think the big pressure they are putting at the moment is that whatever else happens, there must be no break with Israel. In other words, the new Egyptian government should carry on with the siege of Gaza, carry on subordinating Egyptian interests to those of Tel Aviv, and that is not going to be easy.
Now, there have been statements by critics that believe that this unrest is a U.S. planned project. And we, of course, have seen other revolutions in the past. Kyrgyzstan, 2005, Ukraine, Georgia, the so-called color revolutions. Do you think that this is the case in Egypt?
I don't think this is the case in Egypt. It's a very different movement. In the case of the countries you described, the aim was very clear. It was to totally make impossible any new Commonwealth of Nations in what was the former Soviet Union, and to surround the new Russia with enemies, to try and put American bases in there. I mean, that has been partially successful, but not completely. So a lot of money from the National Endowment for Democracy went into these movements, whatever colors they were given, orange, blue, red, I can't even remember now. The Egyptian movement was very different. It started from below, it started slowly, it began to gather strength. It got more and more social layers of the people involved. The working class had come out 3 days ago, huge strikes by workers. The judges were marching on the streets. This was a genuine popular upheaval. Millions and millions and millions of people all over Egypt, not just in Cairo. Alexandria was out of control for one day. No one could control it. The people controlled it. So I think this is a very different uprising from the manufactured ones that we have seen elsewhere in the world, in Eastern Europe in some cases. So one can't compare it to that. What I compare this to is not 1989. I compare this to the wave of uprisings in 1848, which traveled all over Europe. That is what we are seeing in the Arab world now. The 1848 uprisings were against the Austro-Hungarian emperor and the Tsar of Russia. And the equivalent of that today is the President of the United States. And these uprisings essentially are directed against the people who the United States put in these countries to run them.
Do you think it's possible to establish democracy in Egypt? And what are the tools that you think will be needed to do that?
I think two things need to be done. One, we need a new constitution in Egypt. I think the Egyptian Democrats, the Egyptian nationalists should say we need a new constitution which totally limits the power of the army to defending the country from outside attack. The army should have no power in running the country at all, in my opinion. Secondly, a constitution that institutionalizes and enshrines the democratic rights of the people and their social rights. Don't forget that large numbers of Egyptians live in abject poverty, that this government, this dictatorship of Mubarak and Sadat before him wrecked the country, removed the social safety nets. People want food subsidized, they want shelter, they want education for their children, they want a health service, and these rights should be enshrined in a new constitution. And I think once the movement has now had time to reflect on its victory, it has to demand the election of a constituent assembly which will prepare a new constitution.
Historian Tariq Ali, live on the line with us from London. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.